Welcome to the That Don't Fit podcast, a podcast where we're dedicated to talking about life and life's real issues that cross racial and generational lines. My name is Jared Torrance, and I'm here with my co-host, Andy Farmer. We're friends, we're pastors, we're wanting to help people talk and process life in a crazy world. Welcome to the conversation. Take 37.
That's right. Now you get your own name wrong.
Yes. My name is Gerard. Oh, snap. Stop. All right, let's try. We just finished recording this episode on structures and spaces. We did not get to spaces. We got stuck on structures, which was great. And something that we want to do in this podcast is not just give content over these topics, but we also want to notate the tone and the way these conversations can go on here. And something you'll notice is so me and Andy have never talked about the topic of law enforcement and things of that nature before. And so at the start of this conversation, I hope you guys track this and notice it. There are certain guardrails that are up as Andy and I begin this conversation. And by God's grace, as the conversation goes, I hope you notice that empathy is occurring, trust is growing. And I think this is one way that these conversations can happen. And it's one way we can grow in trusting each other over these difficult conversations. And so I hope you guys enjoy this episode. We just wanted to add this blip at the forefront to kind of help you listen in a specific way through it.
So we're talking about conversations on race, and the if you haven't been with us, the big picture we're talking about is kind of driving into a traffic circle and the experience of kind of going around that traffic circle, kind of being trying to survive it. As traffic's coming from a lot of different places and you're not sure and you're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go and where you're supposed to get off, and just the exasperation that can be, and just the difficulty of navigating a traffic circle, difficulty of navigating conversations, and the sense of once I get out of it, I don't want to go back, and can I just say I did it?
Yeah, I
made it through there and I'm ready to move. Let's just get out of here. But the willingness to kind of get into that sense of this is not easy. This is not helpful for how I feel about myself. I have to make adjustments. I have to wrestle through things. It's testing me. So that's kind of the big picture. And we've been talking about particularly life experience, and we talked a little bit about just our own life experiences and how that shapes how we interact over conversations. Last week we talked about the actual experience of conversation, and just in the midst of it, how do we relate to one another?
Yeah.
And so this one, we're going to talk a little bit about another direction. And so JT, just give us some thoughts on.
Yeah, we are going to start talking about big barriers. So if you're in a traffic circle and you're driving around and all of a sudden, you see, oh snap, there's a lane that's shut and you got to like swerve the other way, and something that comes your way that's a bit unexpected. So we're going to touch on some of those things today. Some of the things we talk about are going to be a bit controversial this episode, but again, our goal is not controversy. It's conversation. It's thinking about these kind of things. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time like correcting, critiquing, shutting things down, but we're just going to talk about what's going on in our traffic circles. And hopefully by God's grace, we're going to model how to walk through some of these topics. So we're going to talk about structures and spaces is kind of what we're going to break these things down into. And so Andy, why don't you tell us a little bit about, let's define what we mean by structures and spaces.
Yeah, so structures, I'm thinking about those things that exist in our world that we have to interact with. They're government structures, they're social structures, they're employment structures, whatever they are, things that we exist in that they're set up in our society to make our society work, and we have to interact with those, and how race affects how we interact with those.
Yeah.
And then my spaces, they're just places we live. They're where we live. There are neighborhoods. There are churches. And so I think when I think about the idea of life experience, I think in terms of that. What are the structures I have to interact with, and what are the spaces I live in, and how do they shape me?
Got it.
And because they're often functioning in some ways in the background in my life. They're just part of my environment until something happens and they intrude into, and then I'm asking the question, why is it this way? Why is this way?
Yeah.
Why can't it be different? And we're living in times where both spaces and structures are really being evaluated and addressed, and concerns about them, whether it's politics or whatever. So that's what I mean.
Good.
Things that exist in our lives we have to relate to, and then places we live we have to relate to.
Good. All right. So as we're talking about these things, let's talk about structures first. So Andy, what's one a structure that comes to your mind as you're thinking about navigating these things?
Yeah. Well, I thought about just talking about Little League sports, but we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about law enforcement. That's one that came to mind. I couldn't get off of it, and the criminal justice system. And just for those who are about to kind of switch off here, just so you know, this is not going to be a critique. We are not here today to talk about all that's wrong or all that's right, or how to, what we want to do is enter into it personally.
Right.
Because there's a sense in which a lot of the conversations about these difficult things are not personal, or at least they're not conversational.
Yeah.
And so we want to talk about that a little bit. And so I think the criminal justice system, law enforcement, the way we live, our public safety, in a sense, another way to think about it, and how we interact with that. And I'll start with sort of my own experience with law enforcement. There were about 5 or 6 years of my life where I lived in fear of law enforcement. If I saw a police car, I drove the other way. If I saw one coming, if I saw an officer, I wondered, what are they thinking about me? What are they looking at? What do they see? And it was a difficult experience because I felt like I was always on the verge of being in trouble. Now, the reality was, the reason I had that fear is because I was doing illegal things. And I needed to have that. That was the purpose that they existed, was for people like me, to not do what I was doing. One of my experiences in coming to Christ was recognizing, okay, there's a lot of stuff in my life I can't do anymore. It's not only sinful, it's illegal. And I had this amazing experience within a few weeks of coming to Christ, of seeing a police car and be grateful for it. Oh, these people are here to protect people. And I had a radically different experience. But it's interesting, the way I come into this whole conversation is that I relate to brothers and sisters, particularly in the African American community, who have had that fear of law enforcement, not because they were doing something wrong, but for reasons they couldn't ever change. It was part of their experience. And I would say maybe even not so much, and this is one of the things a friend of mine, Bill, helped me understand, is it may not be your individual experience, but it can be your community experience with something that you recognize. No, I may have not ever had a personal experience with this, but we've had a community experience with it. And one of the things, if you read on culture, you recognize, and this is any culture, any place in the world, dominant culture people tend to think more individualistically. And minority culture people, by virtue of being minority, think more in a community way. And so I think that's, when I think about structures, I think about, there is a difference, and there's sin in structures, and structures, just by virtue of being set up apart from the kingdom of Christ, are inherently flawed. And they're populated by people who are sinners, not well-intentioned, most. And I would look at, my experience with police officers is well-intentioned. They're there. There are things they could do that are far less dangerous and far less stressful they have a desire to do this job, just like firefighters have a desire to put themselves in situations where they're burning buildings. When everybody else should be running, they go toward it. And so there's tremendous respect for anybody who has that willingness to do that. And it doesn't mean that they're all trained well. It doesn't mean they're all equipped well. It doesn't mean they're in situations where they're able to do their job the way they should do it, or do their job the way they should do it. And we're all sinners. So I hope you understand me talking about it this way. I'm not addressing it as police officers. I'm talking about a system.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about how we interact with systems. And so I think we could say with law enforcement, though I may have had an experience of understanding what it means to fear the police, I don't have the profound experience that someone who's African American might have, particularly an African American male. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of throw it back to you and dump it on you to kind of sort it all out for us. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's good. There's a lot there. Well, just to start things off, actually two things to start us off. You know, Christians believe that we are sinful. We are fallen. And if we create structures and systems to keep justice, those systems are going to be flawed. They're created by flawed, sinful people. So there should not be a surprise that these structures that we're going through have corruption in them. So that's just the basic category there, that anything we create is going to have wickedness inside of it. Even, people, even the church, like the church is something that people run, and we're sinful, flawed people who are doing our best, but there's things that we do that are that we make mistakes in. So that's just a blanket statement. We create systems that are corrupt because we are fallen. Because we are not God. We're not perfect. We're not perfectly holy. We're not perfectly pure. All those things. Second, I think we talked about this in one of the episodes of, people are way more nuanced than we want them to be. We want there to be just broad brush blanket statements that we can just sweep over everything and dismiss it altogether. But people are way more complicated than that. And so we need to step into that, and we need to wrestle with the complications and the nuances and the difficulties that come there. But a couple of things as you're talking, just your experience of, the 5 or 6 years where you were doing things wrong. There is that looming fear of police, and I've been studying just certain things of, specifically in Ephesians, talking about unity and all these different kind of stuff, and the church, and how do we maintain unity, and something I've realized is, I just lost my train of thought. There's a difference here. There's a difference between something being a problem and something being bad. I don't want to say every, but the majority of Black folks' experience growing up in America is we have these things called racial identity development moments, where we realize, it's just a super Black moment or something like that. It can be something celebratory, or it could be something where you are actually in danger. A lot of times with us, it's the first time we get called the N-word. It's like, these moments where you realize you're Black, you're very aware of it. And then oftentimes the second thought is where you realize that's a problem. And so being Black isn't a problem, or being Black isn't bad, but it can be a problem. And so your activities, whatever you're doing that were illegal, were a problem. My activity is the color of my skin. And so me simply driving, I can't rid myself of the, quote, I'm putting air quotes here, of the problem of the color of my skin. And the color of my skin is not bad, but it is seen as a problem. And so when you even explain, like, you stop doing these illegal activities and you're free from the fear of police, and you're understanding that they're there to protect, it's just like, oh man, Lord, I want to be able to feel that. Yeah. I want to feel their protection. Yeah. But I feel like I need to be protected from them. I was thinking the other day, I was like, speeding, and I don't mean to get controversial here, but this might be, I don't know. Speeding is such an ego thing. Like if you're a slow driver, people are just like, man, why don't you just speed it up? Like, what are you afraid of? And it's like, dude, if I'm speeding and I run into an officer who's had a bad day and I've had a bad day and I mouth off a little bit too much, like, dude, that could be my life. Like, if enough A, B, C, D, E, F, G, if those things lined up and they're going wrong, like, that could be it. I could leave my wife and my kids without a dad because I mouthed off just a little bit too much on the wrong day. And so it's like we just have to take such extra precaution. And it's like I don't want to think that speeding can lead to my death because I get pulled over. Yeah. Like I want to be able to think, oh, I shouldn't speed because it's dangerous to drive at high speeds. But it's like, no, man, like, or even something as annoying as those little expiring tags on the back of your license plates. Those freak me because you don't have to be you don't even have to be driving wrong to get pulled over by those. Yeah. If I'm seeing my cop, they pull out, and they start running my plates. They're like, oh, dude, he's got that thing. Let's pull him over, see what else we can get on him. And it's just like, so I'm nervous when I'm waiting for those stickers to come in. Yeah. And I'm just like, Lord, just protect me. Because, time and time again, people are like, oh, if they just complied or if they just did these things. And it's like, man, sometimes that doesn't matter. Yeah. And I don't want to be a story that's like, hey, this guy complied, this guy did everything. He's a Christian man. He's such a nice guy, and look what they did. I don't want that story to get out there. Yeah. But I'm very aware that is a possibility. Yeah. And and even raising my children, it's like, how do I teach them to interact with police? Because police are there to protect them. Mm-hmm. And right now, my kids are cute. They're not a threat yet. But what happens, when Isaiah is 17 years old and he's with a couple of his buddies and he tries to make a quick joke to make somebody laugh and the police officer's not feeling it that day. Yeah. How do I have him interact, not out of fear, but out of a respect and the authority, but also like, if you mess this up, it could go really bad for you. Mm-hmm. And I hate that. I hate having to wrestle with, and even in my own life, like, I don't want to fear when I see an officer. But the other day I was at Wawa and there's two officers standing outside the door and I'm just like, I'm checking everything. I was, okay, I got my mask on. Okay, I got these kind of things. It's like, how do I make myself as least imposing as possible mm-hmm. as I'm walking in to grab something from this gas station. Mm-hmm. Convenience store. Sorry, Pennsylvanians. I know Wawa is more than a gas
Wawa.
Station. But yeah, I don't mean to rant too long on that. But just I'm jealous for your experience with the police. Yeah. I'm jealous to be able to see them as protective rather than a threat, than feeling I need to be protected by them. And again, this is not a blanket statement to condemn all police officers. No. This is a recognition that systems are unjust, that systems are corrupt. And I don't know, like, there's not like a label of this is a police officer who's aware of these things and is doing his best. Mm-hmm. And, then there's a red dot. This is a police officer that's going to knock you out if you bump into him in the wrong way. Yeah.
As you're talking, one of the things, if I'm trying to capsulize it, I might say it something like this. You tell me whether this makes sense or not. There are trajectories and ways things that can play out mm-hmm. that you have to anticipate. Mm-hmm. That someone like me, mm-hmm. Frankly, if I'm getting pulled over, it's because, Mister, are you okay? Should you be driving? You're going too slow.
Yes, yeah.
Actually, I'm just listening to music. Forgot I was supposed to be going 55. It's only 35. But there are things you have to. There are trajectories that could play out for you mm-hmm. that are not very unlikely to play out for me. Mm-hmm. And so you have to relate to structures as if there are possible outcomes
Yeah.
that are that could affect you that don't affect me. And so, and this goes to maybe bringing this down into sort of how do we relate over this. I think in our world, this part of the conversation is particularly difficult.
Yeah.
And so, how do we talk about this experience that's different, that's fun, that's very foundationally different, and it's community different?
Yeah. That's good.
My community again values. In fact, some neighborhoods you move into it because the policing is really, really evident, and it's foreign.
Yeah, it's foreign to me. Yeah.
You want to see one, policeman everywhere in your neighborhood. You just what you want, and so there's this vast difference, and I think we can fall into to breakdowns in conversation. Bridges can get blown up.
Yeah.
Over this issue. So I want to do this for both of us.
Yeah.
And I'll start with you. What is one thing, or maybe a couple things, that I might say if we started talking about the experience with law enforcement?
Yeah.
What is one or two things that I might say that you would say this would be very difficult for me to know how to go forward in the conversation?
So you're saying, something you say to me that makes it
in
difficult
the
for
conversation.
me?
So
Yeah.
we're going to take it out of the world of
Yep.
the big picture. We're going to talk about we find ourselves in a conversation.
Yeah.
And the issue of law enforcement experience comes up.
Something that
because I want to learn, because I want to know.
Yeah.
Because I probably say it. So.
Something that's big for me is whenever I'm entering these conversations with someone, I have to do a little bit of a vetting process of like kind of feeler questions. We talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago. Something I didn't even realize that I did, but some of it's self-protective, and some of it's ready. Like, Christians, anybody, I guess, really needs to have in these conversations. What did I say? Oh, a thick skin and a tender heart. And so I gotta figure out what type of armor I'm putting on my skin for the conversation early on, so that my heart doesn't get hardened, but with a surprise shot in the gut. And so, kind of, I guess you can call these triggers or whatever, but if anyone brings up any sort of police, I guess famous, what do you want to call those, viral, whatever you want to call, which I think is a unhelpful category for the death of an image bearer. Those shootings, the hashtag names, and anyone brings up a rap sheet immediately of just, what about what this person did? And what I don't think people realize is what they're doing when they say that is because this person was not perfect in their law keeping, they immediately deserve death, or their death is justified. And when you say that, it's just like, okay, where can we go from this conversation? I'm not perfect. If all the thoughts that went through my mind were displayed on a screen, then I guess I deserve to be killed by a police officer as well. If I'm in a situation like that, that's the trajectory of where those statements can lead. But on the flip side, something I need to do is, if someone has relatives in the police force or in that system, I need to, it's what we talked about last week. I need to be able to empathize with them. I need to recognize they're going to feel every sentence I say at a much higher degree, because they're not connecting it to a broad scale system. They're connecting it to an individual person that they know. And so everything I could be saying about, corrupt officers, they're thinking I'm saying about their corrupt brother who is in the police force. And,
or they're not corrupt brother.
Exactly. Yeah, but
projecting onto that
exactly.
individual.
They're saying I am claiming that their brother is corrupt, which is not the case, and so which can lead to the defense of like Trayvon Martin and then just lobbing out things, and which is just so unhelpful. So that's a big one for me when there's an aggressive defense of someone being murdered. That's just like,
on
okay,
the basis of their actions.
on the
previous
basis of
to.
their actions previous to, or something they've done 12 years prior, or any time there is a lack of lament over the fact that someone lost a son, brother, father, sister, mother, I'm just like, man, we're starting off on the wrong foot here. This conversation is not going to be productive if we can't take ourselves out of political debate and bring us into human lives that we're talking about. Yeah, it's so things like that. That's a big one, and that's when it happens a lot.
Yeah.
Anytime we talk about police reform or police things like that,
Yeah.
immediately we talk about, well, what did they do?
Yeah.
How can I justify
Yeah.
what the officer did?
Yeah.
That's a hard one for me.
Okay. Good.
What about you? Is it, like, in these conversations, there's something that minorities can say that makes people scratch their head, or makes people say, well, I don't think I can really go there, or
Yeah.
that's a broad jump from that to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a great question, and I'm going to speak for me and from talking to other folks who wrestle with this, who I've talked with about this is where they get hung up. I think it's interesting. It's similar to what you're saying, which is taking the system and applying it to
The individual.
individuals,
Yes. Yeah.
and not being able to distinguish. And the way that can come across is if you share experiences of good policing, or even the idea of if we didn't have the police, what we have instead, it can be seen as you don't care about my experience. You're disdaining my experience. And again, what you described before, that we don't want to overly nuance, because some things need to be clear and kept clear. But I think there's this sense of, if we're going to have conversation, recognizing that, okay, this system, the very size of it, will indicate that there are always problems, and what are the problems we can solve, not what are the people that need to be purged. That's the hard part, because someone like me will look and say, well, there are African American officers. How do they fit into this? How does that all work? And it gets very complicated.
Yes.
And I don't have the ability always to take the emotions, set them aside. And so for us to have a conversation, on my end, to be able to kind of say, okay, let's acknowledge that there's brokenness throughout.
Yeah.
Our tax system has massive brokenness.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Anything big, anything complicated is going to have brokenness in it.
Right.
And so, and the very fact that it exists means it'll break over time too. And so even with this issue of what do we do about the law enforcement, what changes, I think changes need to happen, because it's behind the times.
Right.
And life has changed, and training needs to adapt to a new life. But part of it is just, my goal in having this conversation is to, if I'm having a conversation where law enforcement comes into play, is I want to understand your experience.
Yeah.
I want that to affect my perspective, because I want to be wiser. I want to be more discerning in my culture. Knowing that you have a category for there are good officers doing their jobs, that I don't have to make that case,
Right. Yep.
is a very important thing for me. If you make that case,
Yep.
then I can set that aside. So again, doesn't mean it's your responsibility, but if you're asking what will help me, you make the case that there are good officers.
Yeah.
I don't have to make that case.
Yeah, and to mean it, man. And sorry, two more things, because we're getting close to the time here.
Yeah.
Just to help equip people, of like, give them categories of what is unhelpful and what in these types of conversations. when if a black person is sharing their experience of getting pulled over and things get aggressive, and there's been times where I've been pulled over and I've been accused of having a fake license. I've been accused of being intoxicated, even though the officer was, because he smelled it, but it was bug spray. And 4 police cars come up and I'm they're surrounding me.
Yeah.
My roommate, who was in the car with me, just gets to sit in the car, hang out. I'm out. They have flashlights on me. They're making me say the ABCs backwards. I was like, dude, I can't do that. And all these crazy things. And it's just like, if I'm sharing experience like that, or when my brother gets pulled over, after playing a show at a church, and the officer comes up to him and has him roll down his window. My brother was tired. The officer asked him to grab his wallet, reach for the wallet, gun right in my brother's face. Shouting, screaming, flashlight screaming, put your hands on the wheel, put your hands on the wheel, with a gun to my brother's face. All he has to do is one little twitch of the finger, and my brother is dead.
Yeah.
When we share experiences like that, the most unhelpful thing that can happen is, well, he didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Or, well, they didn't throw you into the back of their car. Mm-hmm. Of saying they didn't kill you, like as if that is it should be a relief. It's like, okay, I'm sorry that happened, but you know what? You didn't die.
Yeah. It's a win.
Yes, exactly. Like that's a victory that I'm still alive in that situation. That is incredibly unhelpful. And then the other unhelpful assumption is, or response is, if we're talking about these kind of things, and then it's like, these police officers are putting their lives on the line. Mm-hmm. If you have concerns, why don't you suit up and go do it?
Yeah. And
the problem with that is they are expert empathizers with the police officer. Mm-hmm. They're recognizing, we need to step into their shoes and process what they're doing, process what it's like if, I could feel threatened, or if I delay, I could get shot and die. Yeah. Expert empathizers, but only in one direction. It's like the empathy gets cut off whenever we cross that ethnic line, or the victim line. So those would be 2 things. I'm like, oh man, I wish we could have more concrete, connected thoughts of your empathy here. Let's just take that empathy and put it here as well. And then we can have a conversation. Yeah. Those would be big ones for me.
Good. Yeah, and wrapping up, I think a couple of things. One is, the hard part about these conversations is there are certain kind of conversations that you don't know where it's supposed to go.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we can have a great conversation and not fix anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And maybe it can motivate us to engage in the community more and to find ways to do things. And I think a conversation about these big systems should result in us feeling like a more of a responsibility in our community to be on the side of what can help.
Yes. Yep.
If we do that with one another in conversations, okay, we can stand together with what will really help. And it's not just this, or it's not just this. The world is lacking answers. That's why we're in our fixes. And we have answers that are gospel first, but not gospel only. There are things we can do. There are ways we can enter into conversations that can help. So helping each other know how to engage the world, it can be very helpful. The other side of it really is just, I think we've got to recognize that our theology in the way it relates to the world, it is to recognize and understand the brokenness of it. And that to see that's why, since the scriptures are calling us, there is a certain respect we're meant to have for structures, not because they exist in a way that they deserve respect, but because God has set them up as part of common grace for what could happen if they weren't there. Yeah. And so theology does drive us to, it's broken, it needs fixing, it's impacted people that I know in a very negative way, but the answer isn't throw it away. The answer is help it get right.
Yeah.
Any structure.
Yeah.
Any structure. So we never got to spaces today,
yeah.
but will be another conversation. But I think this has been very helpful.
Good
for me.
Yeah. Good.
So great.
Thanks, man.